Hi everyone, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. Today we are going to talk about South Korea's high suicide rate. It's a topic a lot of people are discussing lately. And we are also talk about the much talked about Korean drama We Are All Trying Here. I will also share my personal experience. I lost my best friend, he is British, while I live abroad. I hope to share this with my islanders. You all islanders have open mind and warm compassion to look deeply into Korean society and me. Thank you. I hope this talk expands past Korean society to universal humanity. A story about you, me, and all of us. And I hope this brings you a little bit of peace and comfort. Let's get started. As you all know, South Korea has held a tragic record. It has had the highest suicide rate among OECD countries for the past 20 years. But what stands out more is the unique pattern of suicides in Korea. Even as the economy grew, the suicide rate didn't drop. And it's high across all age groups, from the youth to the elderly. In other countries, it usually leans toward a specific age group or gender, but Korea doesn't have that distinction. The rate spiked during the economic crisis, but it hardly went down during the recovery. We can't explain this strange situation just with the visual poverty numbers or with individual depression rates. We have to look deeply into the social structure and psychological foundation. The recently released 2025 data for suicide death in Korea showed a slight drop from last year. Seeing this drop for the first time in 3 years, President Lee Jae-myung announced a major shift in policy. He stated that suicide is not an individual's burden. It is a social disaster and a national responsibility directly linked to the low birth rate. Mental health and suicide prevention used to be treated as just a personal bad luck in South Korea or a family burden. Making them a core national task is a very meaningful change in Korean society. But even with this drop, Korea is still stuck at number 1 in the world. This drop is just a fragile illusion relying on outside factors. It's because the after effects of COVID-19 eased up, or because copying a celebrity's tragic choice faded for a while. In short, the recent change in number isn't because our society's structure flaws were fixed. It's closer to a temporary effect caused by fear outside triggers. Suicide is still the number 1 cause of death for all youth and young adults, from their teens to their 40s. And the suicide rate for seniors over 65 remains at the highest level in the world. People often point to endless competition, extreme wealth gaps, and gender conflicts as the reason for Korea's high suicide rate. Of course, they aren't wrong, but all these things are just the visible symptoms. They can't be the root cause. Endless competition and wealth gaps exist in every capitalist country around the world, right? The real question we need to ask is this. When other countries have the exact same symptoms, why does it so often lead to suicide only in Korea? Of course, we need to build a physical safety net. We need to catch those who fall and put budgets into it. Suicide prevention hotlines, early detection of depression, and stronger social safety nets are very important. They are first aid to save people in immediate danger. But these can't stop the structure itself that pushes people to the edge in the first place. A structure that makes people swallow their pain instead of letting it out. The feeling that if you can't prove your worth, disappearing from the world is your only option. And the heavy isolation that no one will step into your world. And a culture that makes you brand yourself as a failure if you can't match the group's exact temperature. These real causes that hit the core of the problem are hard to put into policy reports because they are hard to put into numbers. They don't fit into clear budget categories. That's why no one touches the fundamental structure. The reason the discussion stays so shallow isn't because the experts aren't capable. It's because the deeper you dig into that structure, the more uncomfortable it gets for the people in power. The people who create, maintain, and profit from this system of exclusion. In the end, the establishment ignores the real causes. They lead our society's discussions, control the narrative, and stay silent. From an outside perspective, Korea transformed from being one of the poorest countries to a developed nation. We have a glamorous culture and economy. So this high suicide rate might look like a strange mystery. On YouTube or global online communities, you often see outsiders without a deep understanding of Korea. They use these tragic numbers as a mocking meme. But I assure you, what Korea is going through right now is not because its people are unusually weak. Korea is more like a compressed miniature of the world. We are going through a universal human crisis. Modernization, the breakdown of community, achievements-based identity, and isolation amid a digital hyperconnection. These are crises the rest of the world went through over centuries, but Korea is going through them first and most extremely in just half a century. If Korea finds a solution to this cultural structure that is bleeding through right now, it might become an alternative model for the rest of the world. Because the rest of the world will walk the exact same path a bit later. To foreigners, modern Korea is a dynamic, developed country. It shows off bright night views and polished pop culture. What's funny here is that many Koreans still can't accept the fact that Korea is a developed country. If you say Korea is a developed country, many people Korean will answer, us? No, not yet. We still can't view ourselves objectively. We think we still have a long way to go, and we think we need to work harder, more, and more, and more. So many people look at Korea's tragic numbers and make assumptions. They assume it's the result of academic stress or long working hours. But endless competition and the wealth gap exist in Wall Street in New York too, and in the financial districts in London. The fierce fight for survival is everywhere in the world. Then why does this universal pressure to survive lead to death so often? Why only in Korea? Behind this is a unique ego structure specific to Korean. Psychologists Hazel Marcus and Shinobu Kitayama focused on how East Asians define themselves. It's called the interdependent self. Westerners define the self like an independent island, but Koreans define the self within relationships, like family, company, and society. The answer to who am I comes from relationships like I'm someone's father, I'm someone's daughter, and I'm an employee of a certain company. The way this mindset connects to suicide is critical. When Westerners lose a job, they feel I failed. But when Koreans lose a job, they feel I became a burden to my family and I'm erased from society. Because the ego is tied to relationships, the collapse of relationships means the complete extinction of the ego. This naturally creates an environment that is extremely sensitive to how others see you. Now, when this meets Korea's unique culture of shame, it becomes even more deadly. Korea is more sensitive to shame than guilt. Guilt gives you the motivation to fix a mistake, but shame is damage to your ego caused by the eyes of others. It triggers the urge to hide or disappear. And this shame leads to suicidal urges much more directly than guilt. Even the social buffer that could comfort the shame broke down. It broke down along with the rapid development. Korea jumped from an agricultural society to an industrial and information society in just 50 years. One generation experienced the clash of values all at the same time. The West digested this over 200 years. It was chaos of mixing Confucian family values and individualistic performance-based values, and community ethics with endless competition. In this chaos, the standard of how to live began to shake. This empty space where good norms collapsed is called enemy. It is deeply spread across Korean society. A society with a strong religion has an alternative language saying, I'm valuable before God. A society with living communities has a network that just accepts you regardless of your achievements. A society with a strong individualism has a narrative saying, the eyes of others do not define me. But in Korea, all three of these have become weak. Traditional communities were broken apart. Villages and large extended family disappeared. Individualism came in, but instead of building an inner source of self-esteem, it came in as competitive individualism. People became lonelier, but the society became a structure where you have to prove yourself all alone. Everyone in the world has desires, but when those desires are blocked, the bowl that holds the pain is uniquely empty in Korea. Since there is no bowl, the pain has nowhere to go, and the pain turns toward yourself. Bowls are breaking in other countries too, not just in Korea. But Korea is the country where it happened the fastest and the most completely. It's another phase of compressed modernization. Inside this broken bowl, there are also layers of unhealed, suppressed wounds. Psychologist Kim Tae-hyung analyzes this psychology of Koreans as collective trauma. The Japanese colonial period and Korean War, long military dictatorship, and rapid industrialization. The historical violence left behind a culture of suppression. It says, enduring my pain is a virtue, and you should not show weakness. Like the saying, fascism leaves fascism behind. Korea's historical scars are holding us back. They are stopping Koreans from actively taking care of their mental health today. In fact, Korea's access to psychiatric treatment is at the very bottom of the OECD. It takes an average of 6 weeks for a depression patient to get treatment in the US, but it takes an average of 84 weeks in South Korea. Suppressed pain eventually shows up physically. Koreans don't express mental pain with mental language. Instead of saying, I'm depressed, we say, oh, my head hurt or my chest feels heavy. 화병, recognized by the World Health Organization, is a unique cultural outlet in Korea. It's where suppressed anger and sadness show up as physical symptoms. In other words, our society's verbal and cultural outlets to express emotions are completely blocked. In the 1970s and 80s, we were physically much poorer than now. Back then, Korea's suicide rate was only in the 8s per 100,000 people. It was way below the OECD average. We may have lacked material things, but the whole society shared the hope. If I sweat and try hard today, I can welcome a better tomorrow. Because everyone was passing through the tunnel of poverty together, there was a warmth of community. People didn't pressure each other, but offer a shoulder to lean on. I also asked my dad about his school days. He told me that since everyone was poor back then, if 1 or 2 kids in the class acted arrogant because they were rich, all the classmates would punish them. But the IMF financial crisis in the fall of 1997 was a massive turning point. It completely changed the landscape of the country and human psychology. In just 1 year, the strong-looking national system collapsed. Countless jobs and families were pushed onto the streets, and the suicide rate began to explode. I think we need to pay attention to how Koreans handle disasters at this time. When the country sat on a pile of debt, the citizens brought out the gold they had hidden deep in their closets. If your country needed an IMF bailout, would you sell your own gold to pay off the national debt? At the bottom of that tear for devotion, there was a harsh sense of debt. The feeling that individuals had to fully take responsibility even for the massive failure of the state, because we had experienced lose our nation. This is no coincidence. The average OECD suicide rate is around 11 per 100,000 people, but Korea reaches 25, while its murder rate is extremely low at 0.6. Japan, which has a high suicide rate like Korea, also has an incredibly low murder rate. On the other hand, countries like Brazil or Mexico have murder rates reaching the 20s and 30s, but their suicide rates are only around 5 to 6. Sociologists Andrew Henry and James Short analyzed this. They said, when pain and frustration hit, if human aggression turns inward, it becomes suicide. If it turns outward, it becomes violence or murder. Korea is a society structured so that the energy of pain and frustration flows only inward. Then why did Korea become a country that so intensely think all pain is my fault? At its root is hundreds of years of Confucian teaching. The saying, if the word is wrong, it's because I lack self-discipline. This hardened a mental habit deep into Korean bones. A habit to always look for the cause inside oneself whenever something bad happens. Even if you lose a job, it's because I am not good enough. If you fail an exam, it's because I didn't try hard enough. If you get scammed, it's because I misjudged the person. This strange habit of blaming yourself for everything creates a tragedy. The victim makes themselves the attacker. Even when facing workplace bullying, instead of anger toward the abuser, they blame themselves, saying, I got bullied because I'm weak, and end their lives. Victims of school violence also chose silence over speaking up. In a culture where showing pain is shameful, Koreans put the blame entirely on themselves and sink inward. This internalization of pain isn't just limited to the youth and young adults. This culture of self-blame pierces through all generations. It leads to the world's highest senior suicide rate. In the past, in Korean society, old age was a time to be rewarded, a time to rightfully receive respect and care in return for a lifetime of sacrifice for the country and children. But as family communities rapidly broke down during hyperspeed growth, this unspoken social contract shattered. Those who found their meaning as someone's parent and the backbone of the family, all their lives are now trapped. They define themselves as a useless burden, enduring poverty and illness alone because they don't want to be a burden to their kids and eventually ending their own lives. Their choice is the cruelest ending of the Korean survival logic. The logic that you must disappear if you can't prove your worth. The younger generation despairs because they can't prove their value through ability. And the older generation is pushed to the edge by alienation. The alienation of not getting rewarded for a lifetime of devotion, the helplessness of I'm not no longer useful, and the pain of blaming themselves for all these failures. In the end, suicide in Korean society is the most tragic form of shame processing. It's where social pain explodes inside the individual. What we need to fix is not just adding one more hotline, it's restoring the social message that tells them this is absolutely not your fault. After the harsh winter, the financial crisis passed, the era of extreme free market capitalism arrived in Korean society. High-rise buildings soared again, and Korea's per capita income entered the ranks of a developed country. On the other side, it looked like a miraculous economic recovery. But the daily reality became much harsher. In fact, Korea's suicide rate didn't drop even between 2003 and 2011 when the economy was said to be stable. Instead, it hit a historical peak, solidifying as a social issue. The ladder of social mobility, once broken, was never repaired. The baseline for a normal life rose like a mirage that only a few winners could reach. The rich got richer and the poor got poorer. In the ruins of the Korean War, most Koreans were on a similar starting line. From then until right before the IMF crisis, Korea clearly had a ladder saying, if you try hard, you can succeed. And that experience created a collective belief that effort equals success. Now that ladder is broken. But the problem is that belief didn't break. Even though there is no ladder, the whole society scolds them, asking, why can't you climb up? A culture that blames individuals instead of the structures for failure makes each person internalize their despair even more. The fear that you will become a permanent loser if you don't meet unrealistic standards. The despair that once you slip off the track, you can never get back up again. This becomes a constant fear that continues to this day. The survivor anxiety that your very existence is denied if you are pushed out of the competition. It has become a collective scar on the whole society. Ultimately, long before their physical breath stops, many Koreans already mentally give up on themselves. The moment they fail to meet the standards society demands, they just barely survive day by day. People often think East Asian countries share a similar Confucian relationalism. But when you compare it with neighboring countries, the specific nature of Korea's vacuum state becomes clear. Japan is also a suffocating society with its meiwaku culture. It's a relentless pressure that you must not cause trouble for others. But in Japan, there are buffer zones called subcultures. Countless subcultures where you can survive even if you leave the mainstream track, like the otaku culture or the freighter tribe who live off part-time jobs their whole lives. Even without a decent job or a fancy business card, there is a social room that tolerates the lifestyle of immersing yourself in your own small world. Shame in Japan is focused on whether you broke the harmony of the group. And there is clearly a cultural exit way saying, I will quietly step back from the group when you fail. That's why, although Japan's suicide rate is also high, people often choose isolation instead. China also suffers from intense and exhausting endless internal competition called Neijian. But China's vast territory and extended family system act as a physical and mental refuge. Shame culture in China tends to be shared among the family rather than an individual's personal regime. Above all, even if you fail in Beijing, you can escape. You can go to Chengdu, hundreds of kilometers away where no one knows you. The spatial room to escape from the judging eyes act as a physical buffer against the suicide rate. In contrast, Korea went through an extreme, rapid modernization like nowhere else in the world. While building skyscraper forests from the ruins of war, the tight-knit communities completely evaporated. They disappeared in front of money. We became a perfect vacuum state, a state with no hometown to return to when you slip up and no self-culture to hide in. The only survival role left in that empty space is social achievement and hierarchy. Unlike Japan or China, shame in Korea is focused on a much sharper, measurable hierarchy. Which university you graduated from, how much your salary is, how much square feet your apartment is. These clear numbers have no room for guessing. In Japan, an evaluation like that person keeps harmony well is subjective. But in Korea, saying that person went to Seoul National University or Yonsei University, Korea University is an objective hierarchy. This clear hierarchy creates an oppressive culture, a culture where you only get approval if you force yourself into standards others would envy. Ultimately, it creates a terrible shame that is impossible to even avoid. And above all, Korea is too small and too tightly connected. Most of the 51 million people are concentrated in the capital area. Through KakaoTalk and Instagram, the eyes of others and my achievements are compared 24/7. A failed outsider is trapped by judging eyes with nowhere to hide, geographically or online. On top of this, Korea's unique hurry-up culture applies to processing emotions too. The time from feeling shame to internalizing despair and making a tragic choice is far too short. This fast pace doesn't even give you time to digest your feelings. It becomes a trigger that exploded the suicide rate. Plus, the Korean identity is tied into one single thing: social achievement. In Western society, even if you lose a job, there are many alternative identities, like I'm a father, I'm a church volunteer, or I'm a member of a local club. But for Koreans, the moment you lose a job or slip from the ladder of achievement, your entire identity is blown away. In that state, the gauge of others becomes an attack. And a perfect vacuum state is completed where there is nowhere to escape from those eyes. This fragile, fake self-esteem relies 100% on outside evaluation. It has become a fatal trap. Your whole ego crumbles if you fall even a little behind others. The group most exposed to this cruel vacuum and fake self-esteem is Korean celebrities. While running a YouTube channel, I find my heart cut by just one hate comment amid hundreds of cheers. It keeps me up at night. Feeling hurt by negative comment is a universal human trait, regardless of nationality. Hollywood pop stars and actors also suffer from paparazzi and malicious rumors. Then why are Korean celebrities and public figures pushed to the edge so often, unlike anywhere else in the world? The reason isn't the number of hate comments or universal human weakness. It's because the social structure that takes that pressure and the public standards are completely different. First, it comes from a massive creditor mindset and a relentless demand for perfection unique to Korean pop culture. The Korean public doesn't treat stars just as professionals doing their jobs. They have a collective creditor mindset at the base. They think we gave you wealth and fame by loving you, so you owe us perfect morality and obedience. In Western societies, personal mistakes, dating, or divorce are often just consumed as gossip. But in Korea, if they step even slightly out of line, it's defined as betrayal, and they face fierce punishment. Also, behind the harsh punishment is the suppressed public taking out their anger. The real reason the public is so cruel to celebrities is that they project their own daily pain and fake self-esteem onto those stars. Because hurt people hurt people. People constantly fight worthlessness in reality, forcing themselves into the standards of others. The moment they find a tiny flaw in an idol standing higher than them, they pour out their pent-up anger and inferiority complex. By dragging down a celebrity, they get a cheap sense of superiority. They feel they stand on higher moral ground, even for just a moment. The public's online bullying goes beyond their criticism. It acts as a massive violent ritual to relieve their own stress and shame. There's also no final shield to support their egos. Even when facing extreme criticism, Western celebrities have a strong individualistic culture. They have a mental shield to separate the public's gaze from their true selves. They say they just don't know the real me. On the other hand, Korean celebrities have an extreme interdependent self built by the cheers of the public. The moment the public's love flips into hate, they fall into extreme shame, feeling completely worthless. In this suffocating vacuum, there is no alternative identity to escape to. The public turning their backs leads straight to the collapse of their entire existence. In the end, the back-to-back tragedies of Korean celebrities are not just the rare misfortunes of glamorous people, the structure where the gaze of others becomes your entire ego, the cruelty of projecting suppressed anger onto a scapegoat, and a society that gives no second chances. It is the very mirror that clearly reflects the bare face of our society. The death of a celebrity instantly triggers a chain of death among others standing on the edge. Right after the tragic death of actor Lee Sun-gyun in late 2023, suicide deaths in Korea surged for 2 months. In January 2024, the number skyrocketed by 33.8% compared to the previous year. According to experts, within a month after the death of an influential figure, the public suicide rate increases by about 15%. And if the specific method is exposed in the media, it can shoot up by up to 30%. Why does this tragic copycat behavior, the Verdal effect, appear so fiercely in Korean society? The ordinary people who let go of their own lives didn't know the actor Lee Sun-gyun personally, but they saw a human being shattered in the trap of shame and the public sharp gaze. Through that, they discovered their own suppressed wounds hidden deep inside. They see their own pain in the downfall of that celebrity, the pain of being crushed under the harsh standards of others. If even an idol with wealth and fame crumbles hopelessly because the public's ruthless judgment, how can pathetic little me survive this hellish vacuum? This massive helplessness and despair cover the entire society. This terrible spread clearly shows that the survivor pressure in Korea is a structural disaster, a disaster that one person's willpower alone cannot endure, even though the situation is this tragic for everyone. Mainstream psychology and the shallow healing industry hide the abuser. They dismiss this normal pain response to a flawed social structure as the individual's distorted thinking or lack of mental strength. They teach you to overcome it with personal willpower, saying society isn't flawed, your mind is just weak. That cheap comfort hides the real criminal, the oppressive society. It shifts all the blames to the victim, making them constantly censor themselves. It's a cruel social gaslighting. Why do we turn the cause of every bitter pain onto ourselves instead of others? Why do we choose to deny ourselves and disappear if we can't prove our worth through social achievements? These essential questions aren't included anywhere in thick government policy reports. They can't be packaged as quick visual result. Intellectuals in our society are divided, hiding in their own areas, without talking to each other. The media chops up complex human pain into a few minutes of shallow solutions and consumes them quickly. Above all, if you dig deep into this problem, the bare face of the establishment is fully exposed. The establishment that built and maintains this violent structure called competition. That's why the mainstream establishment chooses comfortable silence, censoring themselves instead of speaking uncomfortable truth. The ones who break through this massive silence and restore the truth are the creators who build narratives. In writer Park Hae-young's drama, We Are All Trying Here, the literal Korean title means everyone is fighting their own worthlessness. I like the original Korean title. The main character Hwang Dong-man is a dreamer. He refuses to grow up. He's so deeply fascinated by movies that he lives inside a fictional movie world. To people who no longer dream, Dong-man just looks like a loser who can't adjust to reality. People point fingers at him. They shout at him to wake up from his fantasy and come out to reality. But Dong-man doesn't come out because he can finally breathe inside his own island called movies. In Korean society, there is a very persistent, unspoken contract. Deep down, you feel you are worthless right now, don't you? Me too. Let's both pretend we don't know that. That's the basic manners to survive in this society. Agree? Hwang Dong-man in the drama ruthlessly shatters this unspoken contract. He reveals his pain, desires, and his pathetic desperation for approval, raw and unfiltered. The real reason people push him away, despise him, and point fingers at him isn't because he's a weird or dangerous person. It's because he loudly fights with the world, constantly hating and sometimes pitying himself. In him, they catch a glimpse of their own suppressed egos that they try to hide. They can't stand the discomfort of seeing their own shame reflected in him. They label Dong-man a failure and try to push him out of society even faster. But true salvation doesn't lie in lecturing him or trying to fix him with normal standards. It starts with just one person, a non-judgmental witness who is willing to walk right into his movie and watch it with him. We become the most cruel when we try to remodel someone into a perfect human or replace them like a machine part. But when we witness someone's worthlessness just as it is and tell them, I will be by your side, that person's word is saved. The drama asks, do you have the courage to willingly work into someone's fantasy? Or have you also become a tool of the system that pushes them away? Just like in her previous work, writer Park Hae-young paints a strange solidarity in this drama too. A solidarity between a middle-aged man and a young woman, two of the most pressured group in Korean society. Some people in Korea criticize the relationship between older men and younger women in her works, looking at it only through the lens of gender power. But if you peel back one layer, the story is about the desperate, equal solidarity of two outsiders. Two humans clinging to each other like life jackets in terrible loneliness. In Korea, men in their 40s are under immense pressure. The moment they lose their financial power and status as head of the household, they lose their voice in society. For the first time, suicide is the number one cause of death for people in their 40s in Korea. This shows just how heavy their burden of youthfulness is. It's the same for Korean women in their 20s and 30s. They are slowly suffocating every day, trapped by the gaze of others and strict standards in a survivor competition. Sentenced to uselessness in their own ways, they don't offer clumsy comfort or advice. Instead, they just cook meals for each other and accept each other's worthlessness as it is. This is also a fierce mourning by writer Park Hae-young herself. She suddenly lost her husband, who was in his 40s, to an accident. She must have wondered thousands of times what he wanted to say but never could. Perhaps she began to write to finally give voice to the unspoken thoughts and feelings he left behind. Through her work, she desperately restores the non-judgmental witness she couldn't fully be. She tries to reconcile with him and save him. This story parallels my own personal loss. I lost my best friend Claude, a British man in his 40s, to suicide on a small, remote island in Thailand. The pessimistic atheist British man disappeared into a handful of smoke. He was cremated to the chanting of Buddhist monks on an unfamiliar island in Thailand. The scene of his funeral was strange yet endlessly beautiful. He was a complete outsider who said goodbye to the universe in his own way. He wasn't bound by Korean success standards or the cold frames of Western logic. He lived on that island in his own colors, rejecting the label of failed foreigner society tried to put on him. After he died, I felt lost for a while. When someone takes their own life, people constantly ask the survivors why. Korean society even demands an explanation from the person who died. Why were you so weak? Why couldn't you endure it? At the end of the day, I was still Korean. I tried so hard to find out why Claude made that choice. For a long time, I tortured myself with the guilt that I couldn't stop him. To this day, I still don't know why Claude made that choice. Only he will know. I suffered more from the cruelty and weakness of humans shown after his death rather than the death itself. For me, writing the novel My Little Island was a promise that I would not leave him as a tragedy. I wanted to show that Claude was a human being who breathed, laughed, and enjoyed the cynical British humor. The life he lived wasn't wrong. We just didn't see him properly. I had to write that down. Putting the pieces of his pain into a novel was my way of reconciling with him and myself. It was a noble ritual for me and a desperate act of salvation just to keep living. Writer Park Hae-young fills empty hearts through a drama. I'm dropping an anchor of words to bid him a proper farewell. Because these warm stories where wounded outsiders just feed each other instead of giving lectures give us the strength to endure today. The most honest and cruel emotion a survivor feels isn't guilty. It's envy. As you dive 10, 20, 30 meters deep, the nitrogen in our bodies dissolved into the blood and numbs the nervous system. When you fall into that strange numbness, the world stops. Death feels not like something cold and sharp, but like a soft, warm blanket. It's euphoria, one of the symptoms of the nitrogen narcosis. Back then, diving deep underwater after Claude left, I felt the urge to spit out my regulator in that sweet fog. I was actually jealous of him. He put down his heavy burden and left so lightly. The temptation underwater taught me that the boundary between life and death is much thinner than we think. We all struggle to keep living. But we might have a hidden desire to slip into that tiny gap if it opens. But the power that pulled me back to the surface wasn't grand sense of mission or a strong will to live. It wasn't a moral command like, I must live more. It was just an extreme physical hunger for ramen and kimchi, a pathetic, cowardly hunger. The word focuses us to find a noble reason to live. They tell us we have to live for family, love, or dreams. But to someone standing right on the edge, those grand reasons are too heavy. In fact, those reasons often crush me even more. I feel this miserable. How can I live holding on to such big love? When those grand values crashing into my pathetic reality, the things that make me survive are actually tiny, petty feelings. In the drama, when Hwang Dong-man felt the worst shame and wanted to hide, the word recorded on his digital emotion watch wasn't frustration or anger. It was hunger. When human reason breaks down, the deepest instinct of our body screams, put logic aside, I need to eat first, I need to live. That hunger isn't elegant. It's shameless, rough, and doesn't care at all about human dignity. So ironically, it is the most powerful. A cowardly hunger is the voice of instinct that doesn't ask what the meaning of life is. The pressure to live well and the needs to prove your existence disappear in front of this primal hunger. It makes you forget who you are or why you live. But it forces you to stand up and cook rice anyway. This shameless, honest hunger is the strongest anchor that lifts us to the surface from the abyss. We endure another day so cowardly, but in the most alive way possible. Korean society is like a giant melting pot. You can only prove you belong if you boil at the exact same temperature as everyone else or get passionately angry at someone. In this melting pot, a lukewarm person who flows at their own pace is treated as a broken part. The message Korean society sends to Hwang Dong-man in the drama is this. If you prove yourself by being great, we will accept you into our group. Trying to prove yourself while broken is just a nuisance. But Hwang Dong-man is broken because he can't prove himself by being great. Telling someone they must meet certain conditions to be accepted when they couldn't meet them from the start is structural exclusion. That is exactly why the title of drama is Everyone is Fighting Their Own Worthlessness in Korean original title. It's not just the Hwang Dong-man. The people pushing him away are fighting just the same. They just successfully hit that fight. Seoul is a strange city. It makes you feel tortured when no one is torturing you, rushed when no one is rushing you, and like you're fighting when no one is picking a fight. There, I fill the blank spaces of my resume with words like I'm cheerful and I'm outgoing. I acted out the me that Korean society wanted without realizing it was destroying me. The faking acting was the most cowardly mask I wore to protect myself. I was definitely a person who didn't match the latitude and temperature of Seoul. Hwang Dong-man tried to prove his existence by being broken, if he couldn't do it by being great. But I chose the opposite direction, disappearing from the world of Seoul and finding my own island. The moment I admitted I was nobody, a greater freedom came to me. I realized I could be anyone, anywhere, anytime. Separating the value of my existence from my achievements. The fact that I can exist without a business card. That was exactly what Korean society didn't teach me. When I threw off my high heels and ran away to a remote island, I finally tasted the freedom of empty space. A life of consuming less and existing less. In a place where no one knows me, I didn't need to prove my existence. I was finally able to make my own temperature and emotions independently. Forgiving yourself is not some magical event where all the burdens disappear and perfect peace arrives. It is a brutal and lonely process. You swing endlessly between hating yourself and pitying yourself, but you never give up on working with yourself. At the end of that long struggle, I want to give the most rebellious and beautiful sentence of healing to the giant melting pot called Korea. Because we are all worthless, we don't need to try hard to prove our worth. Life becomes light as a feather when you accept that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to be happy. We are all individual islands floating in the ocean, fighting our own emptiness. You don't have to puff up your body like a frilled lizard to look big or raise your spikes like a hedgehog to avoid getting hurt. The value we need to get back is the proof forced by society, but the unconditional approval of our existence is self. A firm belief that my island will never sink, even if I don't try hard to prove my greatness. And just briefly stopping by another person's drifting island without dropping an anchor. Silently sitting on the beach together without pushing standards on them. Willingly becoming each other's non-judgmental witness on that empty beach. No matter what fantasy you hide in, or how deeply you struggle in worthlessness, I won't try to fix or lecture you. I will just look at you and affirm that you are there. We don't have to invade or conquer each other's islands. Just the fact that we both exist is enough. Quietly listening to the unique sound of the waves each island holds. When there is just one witness who watches over them without judging them, a person on the edge finally gets the courage to forgive their own uselessness. That is the warmest way of salvation. It keeps us from destroying each other, lets us escape the trap of fake self-esteem, hug each other, and finally breathe tomorrow's air. Like that, without dropping anchors, we can just become willing witnesses for each other and flow safely. Okay, this has been Hana's Island. I always send my love and respect to those who visit my island with an open mind to listen to my stories and to all the islanders who share their thoughts. You are safe here now. If you like my video, please support me with a like and subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. We will meet again next time. Until then, stay comfortable on an island perfectly fit for your own latitude. Take care. Bye.